Pence. 1 in 10 South Africans are now believed to be middle class. This is according to the Institute of Race Relations. The research was revealed during the week and points out that these class newbies are vulnerable to an economic downturn or rising interest rates. To share more on these findings, we are joined by Gabriela MacKay. She's a research analyst at the Institute. Gabriela, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Why even conduct this research?
Well, it has very important socioeconomic and political points that we extrapolated. There are good points to know because we've discovered that government has done a very good job at creating a black middle class by using civil service as an incubator for it. But then also it pointed out where there were problems and policy issues that needed to be corrected.
But this is such an interesting body of work because ultimately as part of the research team, what did it reveal about the growth of this new black middle class?
Well, we found very interesting things because we found that the black middle class has grown quickly over the last 20 years. So what we started to see is we saw the disposable income increase substantially, so by about 40%. So that was black disposable income as a percentage of white disposable income. So that was really good. The other things that we measured were things like medical aid coverage. And in that we still found massive discrepancies. So white medical aid coverage was still massively ahead of black medical aid coverage. And then certain things like appliances owned, houses owned but not paid off. We looked at all of those things to gauge who the middle class were, and then we extrapolated further into looking at the size of our black middle class.
So let's touch on those two issues quickly. Medical aid. You were saying that there were massive differences there, and then you also looked at who owns homes, and just unpack that for me very quickly.
We just what we did was, instead of coming up with a definition, because that's somewhat artificial, because what is being middle class? Is it the amount of money that you earn and spend, or is it lifestyle? So we used indicators instead, and we thought that those would be better ideas. So if you owned your home but still had a bond on it, it meant that you had access to formal financial services, so you probably had a white-collar job. The idea behind that is somebody was willing to give you access to the formal financial services, which means that you can afford to pay them back. Small things like that we started looking at. If you could afford medical aid coverage, then you probably had a good job that could afford you to have that sort of feature in your life.
But when you talk medical aid, was there a classification? For example, and I'm breaking it down to its nitty-gritty, but for example, medical aid, you get hospital cover, but you don't necessarily have full medical aid cover. You could live in a wealthy area, but you're renting the property as opposed to owning it, but you earn above a certain income.
What we did was we didn't unpack that closely because what we tended to do, that's why we gave the conservative figure of 1 in 10 South Africans. You could extend that to 20% of the population, but that seems extremely high and unrealistic because you wouldn't probably meet all of those features. And what we found, as well as with economic shifts and economic downturns, some people may sacrifice certain elements of a middle-class lifestyle in order to keep your house in a good area, for instance, or keep your car, or keep your medical aid plan, and then still be middle class, but maybe you don't have the internet at home or the DSTV or whatever else it may be.
Let's talk about that, just a benchmark very quickly, because or let me ask this question: is there a benchmark to be classified middle class or successful? Have you, part of the research, was there a common denominator?
Well, amongst the indicators we found, we kept finding the same numbers popping up. There was that 10-15% that kept popping up, but we tried to steer away from saying if you spend more than 10,000 Rand disposable income a month, you are definitely middle class. You're probably a very good indicator that you are, but we want to stay away from saying that this is the absolute definite.
Issues around education, did that come up?
They did, because what we found policy-wise, we found that the education system needs to be improved, because you need to have a good education system that then allows for students to go into tertiary education so they can move into the highly skilled sector of the labor market. And other than that, well, middle-class people tend to put their children into private schools, and we also saw that independent schools and the number of students in independent schools went up.
I want to know, obviously you're focused on one type of research, but what were some of the other things that you discovered by default?
The school one was definitely one by default, not things that sort of weren't included in the report that we discovered by the wayside, where things sort of like the number of security guards have gone up not included, but it's possibly a good indicator as well.
So more middle class you are, more security guards you have?
Probably you're likely to have security as well. So there are a lot of abstract things that crept in, but the main ones that we took from this was we took that the middle class has grown quickly, the black middle class especially, and they're vulnerable to the economic downturn.
Is that a good or bad thing? Sorry, Gabriela, is that a good or bad thing?
It's a very good thing. It's a good thing because it tells you that a lot of people have seen an improvement in their quality of life, and it tells you that it's something that's become aspirational, and more than that, it's become achievable, which is really good.
Will we, I don't know, very quickly, will you be able to maybe 5-10 years from now follow up this research with the same groupings of people to see if they still stayed in that gap, in that wealth gap, or? That
was the idea. So the idea was we took indicators that were very measurable so that we could measure, so we could see over time how the numbers increased or decreased. And at the moment, the Institute fears a decrease, simply because the black middle class is vulnerable to economic downturns, because they aren't multi-generational like a white middle class is.
For sure. Gabriela, interesting research. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Gabriela MacKay, she is with the Institute of Race Relations and did an interesting study on the middle class, or the growing middle class, and just some of the issues that they face, with some concerns of economic downturn and rising interest rates affecting that definition of middle class. Let us know what you think. It's really interesting. Morning Live at SABC.co.za. Let's take a break in again.